So the question that we combining together is, how do we work with folk who are not into this? Do you want to be insights?
Yeah, so we had a really great conversation, I think, and we talked a lot about working with people who are coming from different places for different reasons, and we talked a lot about sort of simplifying things down. So our key insights were around make sure that the core is to focus on developing the question with a group, and just keep the focus on the question rather than getting too much into difficult language for folk. Also, in terms of hosting, let go of the need to feel that it has to be successful, that everybody will be with you all the way, and so on. And also focus on hosting all the time. So it's not just in a workshop; it's always, and carrying that through all the time.
And then the next step that we thought about was we would sit back. Sit back and listen to that.
Listen to that.
It helps. So, point for everybody, it helps if you're keeping time to have a sound, whether that's a bell or a horn, something that indicates really clearly that time's up, and then it feels a bit less. It still feels very. Yeah.
Or just a cup of glass.
Yeah.
You do it as well. It helps you as the timekeeper not to feel so intrusive, because it's the phone doing it, not you.
You can look away.
Yeah, and then we'll go.
Yeah. And Cam, your invitation, I think, was just to read the question and the next best step, wasn't it?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay, thanks, Ars. Steve and I combined our question, which we thought was very similar, about how to build bridges with mechanistic systems, and how do we change the culture of committee, which on the surface looked like the same question, but actually it wasn't. One was coming from the perspective of kind of looking in and kind of making changes. One was from being within it and what did it mean. But we came up with some, this whole idea of kind of the question was around the living system and the mechanistic way of working and how does that interact. Really lovely idea around blobs and squares. About,
So I was going to say, no, I won't explain blobs and squares, except that's the next step. There was a great video, which I haven't yet seen, about blobs and square being mechanistic, blob being something that's a bit more living and trying to make change. I really want to see that video.
It's on WhatsApp.
It's on WhatsApp.
I have lots of notes underneath. In Surface, my interest is in tools and techniques, methodologies and systems that we can learn to apply within organizations. And the next step that really came out of it was simply, you can't know all these things. Build a good network. That probably is the only thing. Because I have lots I can tell you. That's the step. You can't do it alone.
Where is it? Yes, it is. Right, so my question was, how do we work with an expert content-driven group that doesn't really buy into the process? I work with scientists and engineers in a development context. That's very important for me. How do I engage such audiences and such groups? And our group was Sarah, Jenny, Elisa, Priska, Linda, Jonathan, and Emma. And we came up with three very interesting insights. First of all, advice is to start small and plant the seed where the soil can really help the seed grow. Use maybe some story sharing, be able to see through different lenses, so people can disiddentify themselves from being an expert to become an individual and work in that sort of capacity. And then create the space to allow people to have such conversation as individuals rather than experts, or perhaps as an open space or this sort of approach. Yeah? Okay.
So my question was how to make a balance between this chaos and order, or living system and mechanistic system. So how to, but based on reflection from what we've done yesterday. That was my question, more reflecting time. And my next step is collect more stories from the participant, from you. When you feel chaotic, when you feel order in this process while we are in as an Art of Hosting training, I will make this kind of template and I will put it as the next step, and you can just go around if you have a time and I feel like chaotic, you just write it down when you feel the chaotic, which process, so that will be my next step. So I will put it in the outside somewhere.
And my question was about leadership. What do we talk about when we talk about leadership? What's a leader? A leadership quality? What's a follower? And the next step that we collectively agreed upon is actually a good question, a really strong question that came up during the discussion. It's about the context. The question is, when we talk about leadership, does the environment or the culture come first? So it's about the context of leadership, and actually probably the next step is to think about what is culture and how do we create a culture that enables good leadership. Can I invite Scott to come and talk about the next step with me?
Oh.
Okay, because Scott came up with a really great message. So my question was, how can we embed the practices that we're learning into our everyday? It was a really interesting conversation with lots of practical, tangible outputs. Yeah,
and so with the next step, just thought we already came up with a whole bunch of really interesting small little interventions, going for a walking meeting, things like that seemed like stuff we could try out. So we thought the next step is to open it out to the wider group here. And on the WhatsApp group, maybe run a weekly practice, a check-in, where I'll send a reminder to the WhatsApp group to say who this week has experienced a time when they got to employ some of these skills. And I'd love for people to kind of buy in and want to feed back into that. And I think, just from our group, we learned so much. I'm sure the wider group could contribute lots. And it would also just be that gentle reminder, are you putting these things into practice? A little nag, I guess. So I'd love for you to join in this nag. I'll just have a So the question was, how do we bring what we've learned or what we're learning here to help build a more inclusive Brighton? Which is very much talking to the question that was called around Brighton itself. And we got quite deep into homelessness, talking about that almost as a metonym, as a smaller kind of subset of the wider set of problems in Brighton. Brighton felt like a big thing to try and tackle. But from a next steps point of view, what do we put here? Yeah, maybe there aren't so many tangibles, but we do feel that there's a lot of value potentially to take in gathering some more stories of homelessness. So one thing we touched upon was the challenge of creating a space where pedestrians or passers-by can connect in a meaningful, empathetic way with people who are constituents. They're part of their community, but they don't feel part of their community, and there's a gap or a space there. So definitely, the question is, how do we use these skills? There's an opportunity to think about how we host a space that creates room for empathy, and then to harvest some of those stories, and from those stories to listen and then figure out what comes next. That's where we've got to. And just thank you to everyone that participated as well.
Can I just say something about that? We're doing some work around sleepers and day services. There is a school of thinking to say that because Brighton Home is so empathetic, it's why we have much larger numbers of street vendors.
Because we tolerate it.
Because it tolerates people, and people are often, so with begging, people can, they'll be able to put money that can be given in the course of one day. So it's a really, really complex, I suppose I'm just sharing that, I find it very complex. And, you know, you need to say that.
So thank you everybody for sharing that.
Sorry.
Is there anyone else?
Yeah.
Sorry,
The question was, what assumptions, philosophies and or worldviews underpin the practices of art posting? So, we had an absolutely amazing 50 minutes. I had a great time. And it was basically about sort of trying to bring the things that perhaps are unspoken or uninterrogated into a sort of more visible space that we can think about them correctly. And the next steps that we came up with were a suggestion to try to map the values of the art posting network, so to try and see whether these values that we assume are actually there. And then there was a point made that with quite a good analysis of love, but not necessarily a good analysis of power. So there's the next step around developing a better analysis of power and how it works within the art posting practice.
So my question was around how to bring diversity into the chaotic path and living systems. And it was an interesting conversation. I think it went into two different spheres. One about the art of hosting, learning the practice spaces, and then one about the emergent spaces that come out as a result of us being here. And we then talked about how can we practically do this. So one of the ways we think is probably making diversity present in the design of these spaces. So one of the ways to do that when we go out into the world and create our own little things is to bring diverse people into the design process. Because we will never be able to see and look at our unconscious biases. We need somebody to hold us. And with that in mind, I'd like to extend an invitation for anybody who feels like for anybody who has felt like this could be better, this could have been a better space in terms of diversity, inclusivity, accessibility, let's have a little evaluation of it and see if we can iterate that and take it into our emergent spaces.
Thank you very much.
Okay. So thank you for sharing back next steps with us. I just want to invite you now to talk a bit or share anything that you noticed about the actual experience of the open space, and as participants as well as the hosts and the harvesters, is there anything that